Well, this last podcast episode dropped only a few weeks ago. I wanted to bring it back again for those of you who missed it, or for who might not have finished it, or just want to hear it again. My conversation with Marianne Williamson is one of the most important conversations for this time. As we round out 2024 and all the angst and unrest and political strife that so many people felt, and also the joy and the happiness and the excitement that other people felt. I don't want to discount any sides of this, because in discounting one side, we are moving away from what we most need right now, which is to connect, to talk to each other, and to understand what someone else might be going through and why other people might be making choices that they made. So I wanted to bring you my conversation again with Marianne Williamson so you could listen maybe with a different ear as you're not as hectic scrambling to get to work or whatever it is, but as you have some time to really sink into this episode and think about what she says and what she is encouraging all of us to do as we enter into this new year. Today's podcast guest is really probably one of the people I have admired the most virtually in my spiritual journey. Years ago, when I was just in college and graduate school, there was a quote that I kept on a yellow piece of construction paper. And I kept it in this folder called Inspirations. And I also, in this folder, and I encourage you to do this as well, kept cards that people had sent me over time. Even I remember keeping a piece of my, an email I printed out from the professor of mine that was reading my doctoral dissertation at the time, all the things that I could reference in those moments where I had self-doubt, when I was questioning whether or not I wanted to move forward in whatever way I wanted to move forward. I would go to this folder and I would read what was in there as a reminder of who I was and who I wanted to be. And one of my favorite quotes from Marianne Williamson was a quote I kept in this folder. It's often mistaken for Nelson Mandela, but I just wanted to share it with you. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God within us. It is not in some of us, it is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So this is from Marianne's book, Return to Love, which was probably about 20 to 25 years ago. It's her reflections on principles of A Course in Miracles, which we will talk about today. Her new book, The Mystic Jesus, is out now. While it has religious, I think most people hear Jesus and they think it's religious. This is not. This is more about what Jesus signified emblematically, who he was, the values and virtues he held true, and how we can bring that in our everyday life. This is a deep discussion around why we are where we are in this country, spiritually, what is happening to us, the spiritual crisis we are all in, and how we can find our way out of it. So with that, I bring you this amazing episode with Marianne Williamson. Welcome, Marianne, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
And as you know, because we talked a little bit, I am so honored to have you here as my guest today. So,
I appreciate that.
Thank you. So the timing of this is your new book, The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love, is out now. And the election and everything and where we are. And I know you ran for president. This is not going to be a political conversation per se, but What is your take on the spiritual crisis that it feels like we are in? People say it's a mental health crisis. I actually think we're in a spiritual health crisis. And there's no better person for me to kind of riff on this with, I think, than you, because you've been saying this for years. So can you just give us some insight as to what you think is happening spiritually with us?
Well, I 100% agree with you that what they're calling a mental health crisis is actually a spiritual health crisis. There's actually a line in the Course in Miracles where it says religion and psychotherapy at their peak are the same thing because it's a healing of the mind. Mm-hmm. So the soul needs love and connection, the spirit, the truth of who we are. You can give it so many names. You can say the deepest part of us, the light, the Shekinah, the Christ mind, whatever, that which is most essentially us, needs love, needs connection, needs a relationship with something outside ourselves, the same way the body needs food and the body needs water. It's a requirement. And when we don't have those things, we become diseased. And we have at this point in our modern society two things that have caused disruption. One was the advent of Western materialism, Western science, which has also done many good things. I mean, nobody's doubting that. But I think most of us would agree that something went too far. Back in like 1860s, that period of time, when the Industrial Revolution was beginning to rev up, this would be more like the 1880s, there were artists and philosophers in the United States and in Britain. Walt Whitman was an example. Emerson was an example. Edward Burne-Jones was an example, who were trying to sound the alarm. Thoreau was an example. Trying to sound the alarm. Wait, no, we are becoming so mesmerized. Once machines came into the picture, people became so mesmerized by what was happening on the outside that a certain kind of internal connection, like a muscle, began to wither away, causing a great imbalance. And now we are imbalanced to the point of disconnection from those things which are most eternally true. Now, that was the first thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing is what has happened in this country over the last 50 or 60 years. And that is a perversion of the social contract as we have allowed economic values to overwhelm humanitarian and democratic values. Mm. So too often, the decision of some huge corporation is based on what will cause greater profit, short-term profit, than whether this will be healthy food, whether it will be
affordable
toxins in the air, whether it will make us healthy, whether it will be safe for children, whether it will allow people to thrive. And at a certain point, the accumulation of these stress points has people's lives falling apart. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a time when people sat on their front porch, and at the end of the day, after everybody was at work, the kids were playing in the street and all the kids and playing, and the parents are sitting on the front porch, talking to their neighbors, watching the kids. They had the time to do that. Mm-hmm. You know, during the 1970s, the average American couple could afford a house, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted, could afford to send their kids to college. The economic despair and anxiety that is chronic in the lives of 70% of the American people. If someone, it's not just that people have cancer, it's that people don't have health insurance. It's not just that someone can't find a job, it's that it's not possible for them to work on just one and support their family. So I noticed in my own life as someone who does counseling, when my career began back in the 1980s, I very early in my career was counseling people with life-challenging illnesses such as AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
But when my career began, meeting people, encountering people, working with people whose lives were in crisis, in the majority of those cases, the crisis was the exception and not the rule.
Mm-hmm.
What I began to realize kind of late 1990s, 2000s, early 2000s, was how many people I met for whom daily life was a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to survive was a crisis. Having enough time for your spouse and your kids was a crisis. Something's really wrong.
Yeah.
And that, of course, has so much grounding in economics and in the fact that our government has been turned into a kind of system of legalized bribery where these huge economic forces have such undue influence. So then everybody says, well, what about mental health? Well, what about changing the policies that are, making people so crazy? I remember a U.S. senator saying to me 20 years ago, Miss Williamson, do you have any ideas about what we should do about the mental health crisis? And I remember saying, yeah, stop driving everybody crazy.
Right, because
Stop
they're
passing
doing
law
what they
after
always do, right? Which is treat the symptom, not the underlying problem.
Well, they want to treat the symptom, but also let's remember this, Amy, it's even bigger than that. They don't want to talk about the root cause, and they don't want to talk about the root cause because of how often they are the root cause. Mm. Mm-hmm. So the system is pathological at this point. We have moved from dysfunctional to malfunctional. Mm-hmm. People's lives are falling apart.
So where, as an individual, and I want to weave in this notion of Jesus in this, because it's not necessarily Jesus as a religious figure in the same way as it is like a consciousness that he held. So can you speak a little bit to this notion of what the mystic Jesus was and this mind of love? And then if we can tie it back into where we can begin to heal, that would be amazing.
First of all, when we talk about this mental health crisis, what's happened is that we're living at a time when all of these various factors, such as we've already spoken about, are an assault on the nervous system. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing we have to do is to shore up the nervous system. And there is no greater way to do that than prayer, meditation, mindfulness practice, deep reflection, quiet. Blaise Pascal lived centuries ago, the French mathematician and philosopher, and he said, every problem in the world stems from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Mm-hmm. That's why mornings are so important. Our connection to nature, walking through nature, sitting quietly, especially now with the advent of social media. Mm-hmm. So why do we have to first shore up the nervous system? First of all, because we have to endure these times and not like crack up because of it. And secondly, because ultimately we have to transform these times. Now, the word religion comes from the Latin root religio, means to bind back. Some people are finding this binding back through religious practice, some through spiritual but not religious practice, and some people through secular ways. I'm sure when somebody comes to work with you, there's secular language too. It's all the same. Truth, there's one truth spoken in many different ways. Jesus is one name on the door into the portal of unconditional love. The Course in Miracles does not see him as an exclusive thing. So like you said, there was the man who lived 2,000 years ago and was as a man and remains today the central figure in an organized institution, the religion of Christianity. So there's nothing in the mystic Jesus to disrespect that or undermine that or anything like that. It's simply saying that as we have grown, remember when Jesus was alive on the earth, Sigmund Freud was still thousands of years away. Mm-hmm. So when he said, my kingdom is not of this world, he wasn't talking about something out there. He was talking about something in here. Mm-hmm. When in Romans it says, conform not to the patterns of the world, but seek a renewal of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is a transformer of our lives because he transforms the mind. So in A Course in Miracles, it says that God has placed within our minds an eternal communication link between himself and his separated sons. We are separated when we are in this, it's like a parallel universe.
Mm-hmm.
There are two parallel universes. One is everything seen through the eyes of love, forgiveness, unity, blessing, harmony, peace.
Mm-hmm.
There's another, a parallel world, conflict, dissension,
Fear.
disharmony, suffering, right? So the Course in Miracles says that
for people who don't
level-
know, can you talk about what the Course in Miracles is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Course in Miracles is a self-study program of spiritual psychotherapy. It is not a religion. There's no dogma. There's no doctrine.
And it came through a psychologist.
Yeah, absolutely. Two psychologists at Columbia University.
Mm-hmm.
So it calls itself a psychological mind training in the relinquishment of a thought system based on fear and the acceptance instead of a thought system based on love. It's a course in the psychology of forgiveness. It's a course that takes all these universal spiritual themes and says, that's great that you know them, but how do you apply them? Mm-hmm. It is a practical course. And that's what the Mystic Jesus is. It's a book that talks about, okay, I know I'm supposed to forgive everybody. How the hell do I do that?
Right. And
So
I think that's always the question I certainly get.
And that's where we are. I think we're on so many levels. Well, on so many levels, we're in an age of a huge rethink. We're rethinking politics. We're rethinking business. We're rethinking health. We're rethinking nature. We're rethinking spirituality and religion. And so the Course in Miracles says that enlightenment begins as an abstract concept. So many of us now have read the same books, whether you read those books in terms of traditional religion or mystical traditions. You know, in Judaism, there is the Kabbalah. In Islam, there is Sufism. All of the great religious traditions have those mystical centers. The Gnostic and mystical Christian perspectives have been here since the earliest days of Christendom.
But why don't they get the same attention that? Okay,
well, have you ever read the book?
I feel like I'm in like the best class I ever took right now.
That's so sweet of you.
I get to ask all the questions.
Oh, thank you. Did you ever read the book, The Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels?
Mm-mm.
It will totally blow your mind because what she shows in that book through archaeological research is that in the early days, there were two main rivers. That river of Christendom, which ultimately became the ecclesiastical church, has always sought to trivialize and minimize the Gnostic tradition, even to the point of running people off into the hills. And when the Nag Hammadi manuscripts were found, the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's what they were. They were proof that these more mystical teachings existed at the beginning. So it's the difference between my relationship with God has to be brokered by an external institution and its laws and its doctrines and its dogmas versus the Holy Spirit of God speaks to me within my own heart. Now, in both Judaism and in Christianity, there is the notion of the small, still voice for God. And so the idea here is that Jesus, as a man, lived on the earth and attained the divine potential that exists within us all. He says in the Course, and I open with the book, the quote where he says, I don't have anything you don't have. The only difference between us is I don't have anything else. I am in a state that is only potential in you. He has become the divine potential. What does that mean? That means if you and I get to the point, when we get to the point, where every single moment, every single day, our perceptions are purified of anything but love. Now, the Course in Miracles says Jesus got there. And his having got there, he was then authorized to help anyone else who requests it. If we don't request it, it would be a violation of our free will. But should we request it, And it doesn't matter your religion. It's not, nobody gets to own the sunshine. Nobody gets to own the breeze. The Jesus that is appearing today from the subconscious, really emerging from deep in the human subconscious, is the mystical Jesus in that it is not tied to a particular religion. Many people feel that Jesus has become like you go into a big museum and up on the third floor, there are these glass cases, but it's musty. Mm-hmm. And it's like stuck in a glass case. But in fact, as St. Augustine said, this material is ever ancient and ever new. So this is not about the journey of one man 2,000 years ago. It's about our journeys. And then you begin to see, and I've written about this elsewhere. I wrote a book called Tears to Triumph. I wrote about this in terms of Buddha, in terms of Moses. You begin to recognize, just like when people say every time you have a dream, it's a character part, an aspect of yourself. Mm-hmm. You begin to see that these religious stories are code describing the journey of your own life. Mary is your own heart, awakened in the middle of the slumber that we're all in, and told, go up on the roof, start praying, start meditating, because then you'll be able to hear the angels, the thoughts of God. They will tell you something new is going to be born. Mm-hmm. The humanness in you will be impregnated by the Spirit of God. And this new version of you is going to come out. And one name for it is the Christ, which is the you fully actualized. You will go through the travails. Herod will be out to get you. You'll go through your ministry, doing the work in the world. The ego mind is going to have none of it. The ego mind, which is within all of us, seeking to invalidate the fear. That is the mind that is really turned against God, that's 180 degrees away from the thoughts of love. Will try to crucify your dreams and crucify your marriage and crucify your love affairs and crucify your planet. And if you hold on to love, the whole thing will resurrect and you'll be better than ever because you will have risen. So you begin to really see this as a psychological journey.
The metaphors. Pardon? The metaphors for life in some way.
I would argue that it's more than a metaphor. It's more than a metaphor. It's your journey. You know, we're all on a spiritual path, whether we know it or not. Mm. So I think metaphor keeps it a little too abstract and symbolic. I think it's an understanding of what's happening. It's not even about, do you or do you not believe this? It's like, take a look at your own life.
And how much do you think everything has become externalized? It's someone else's fault. It's someone else's problem. I mean, it's so apparent today, right?
Well, we are taught, the Course in Miracles says that there's a thought system that dominates the world, and it is a thought system based on fear. And the Course in Miracles says that fear is to love what darkness is to light. Darkness is not a thing, it's the absence of a thing. Fear is simply the mind as it was created in love. That love blocked. The Course says this, the Course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It aims at removing the barriers to the awareness of love's presence. From the time that we're born, we're taught a thought system based on fear, the idea that we're separate from each other rather than one with each other. I'll give you an example. On the level of the body, obviously we're separate. You're over there and I'm over here. But on the level of spirit, there's actually no place where I stop and you start. Mm-hmm. The Course in Miracles says you are like a wave in the ocean, thinking you're separate from other waves. But if I only base my sense of reality on what my body's eyes perceive, then I only see the externalities. I don't think anything else is going on. Other people over there, I'm over here. It's a random universe. It's all meaningless. There's no spot where I can really have comfort. Mm-hmm. Then that's that mental health crisis you're talking about.
Well, that's the disconnection.
That's the disconnection. So the Course in Miracles, let's follow that image of the wave in the ocean. Mm-hmm. The Course says you think you're a wave separate from the other wave. So obviously there's no place where one wave stops and another starts. Okay. If I think I'm a separate wave, how can I not live in constant terror that I will be annihilated by some other wave.
Mm-hmm.
Every moment, oh my God, I might disappear.
Mm-hmm.
But if in fact you think, wait a minute, I'm one with the ocean. The ocean moves. I move, the ocean moves. Now, I can't be obliterated. I'm part of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Think of the psychological difference. And that's the the Course in Miracles says enlightenment is a shift in self-perception from body identification to spirit identification. If I only think I'm a body, I'm my resume, I'm where I've gotten it right, I'm where I've gotten it wrong. I'm either too young or I'm too old. Other people like me or other people don't like me. It's a constant maelstrom of neurosis.
Exactly.
And the spirit is like, it's cool. My physical birth was not the beginning of my life, but a continuation. The end of my life physically is not the end, but the continuation. On the level of spirit, all of us are one. All that's real is love. You love me, I love you. We just all make mistakes because it's confusing here. Now, let me say, getting there is easier said than done. I'm not saying that.
That was going to be my next question. It sounds
he
like
says,
you start with prayer and meditation and a practice.
Well, you start with forgiveness, though. So he says in the Course, my way is not difficult. It's different. There's nothing about what I described there that's difficult. What's difficult is life. Mm-hmm. The truth is simple, but life is complicated. And mm-hmm. we all have our blind spots. We all have those triggers where, usually based on childhood, or maybe something in adulthood, in some moment, I don't know how to express my love and get my needs met. Mm-hmm. And then if I'm not extending love, I'm projecting fear. And so the Course says that we're taught from a very early age such unnatural thinking that at a certain point, the judgmental thought, the attack thoughts, the defensive thought, the unloving thought feels more natural. Mm-hmm. And real love, natural thought of love and forgiveness feels unnatural. So enlightenment is an unlearning mm-hmm. of an old thought system. And Jesus is a guide to that. He's a psychological and spiritual guide to that.
Yeah. I think when people talk about wanting to embody more or learn how to be more spiritual, my response is you don't need to learn to be more spiritual. You need to find your way back to that spiritual self.
To unlearn.
Right.
Thoughts like,
intuition, like all of those pieces that we're
yes. And I would submit that the ones that are so dangerous have to do with perceiving guilt. So the ego mind is like a heat-seeking missile, finding any scrap of guilt that anybody has. Like a scavenger dog. See what she said.
Like
see
a rat.
What he did. It is like a rat, actually. Yeah. It is a rat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. I've talked about this before. I've done a couple of psychedelic journeys, and having been a therapist for almost 20 years and doing the journey and watching the ego, it's fascinating to see because you see how hard it does exactly that. It like chases and just, it's like a force that you have. I mean, it's very powerful to watch it in that state where you can observe it more than engage with it if you can allow yourself to get there. But mm-hmm. It's allowed me now to observe it more. But I think before it's much harder to see the separateness of it or how hard it tries to do what it tries to do.
I think we're all going through experiences right now where we're being forced. Even the country is, the planet mm-hmm. is. You know, spiritual detox is like physical detox. Stuff has to come up in order to be released. Mm-hmm. So when you ask God to heal your life, the gift that he gives us is a magnifying glass on where we're off, where we're loveless, what our patterns are, what our character defects are, which is why it feels like things are getting worse rather than better. But really, we're all being forced to look at what you've done with your life, what you've done with your democracy, what you've done with your planet. And that's why everybody's kind of in a state of horror. But this is a good thing because it's what we're going to, we have to see it before mm-hmm. we can commit to transforming it.
Right. And how could we make change if things kept on the same path that they were on? Although
I'm sorry, what did you just say?
I said, how do you make change if you don't see that the path you're on needs changing?
And then the way it happens psychologically is we go, how could things have gotten so much worse? And the Course would say, no, it was this bad before, but you were anesthetized to your own experience. It's always been this bad. You were just so clueless.
Right. And I think I've heard you talk about this. Like, I was not surprised by the outcome of what just happened. And I think that if you were paying attention, you wouldn't have been either. And so it's like so shocking to me how so surprised people are. And it's like, then you weren't listening, you weren't watching, you were anesthetized to your way of thinking as the only way of thinking.
Absolutely. Distracted, thinking other people were handling it, not recognizing what was going on other parts of your city, miles from you, not realize how many people in this country are hungry. I feel that a void was created, and Trump stepped in.
What? I was just reading that this morning. I think you wrote that in the Transform this morning. Yeah. So you talk about, love is the organizing principle of the universe. For people who don't know love, they don't know what it feels like to be loved. They don't understand even what that means. How would you define that term for someone?
I think most people, certainly most people who would be listening to your podcast, do know. It might have been one moment in somebody's arms, your mother's, your lover's, a baby. The Course in Miracles says all of us have in our minds an ancient melody that won't go away. I read a book many years ago, I think it was called The Paradise Myth, about how in every religious system there's some version of paradise, some land we once were in and to which we long to return, some realm. So whether it was, some fairy tale, the board of Candyland, watching Avatar, a human experience, we said that. You were talking about psychedelics. A lot of people are now, realizing something. We go, yeah. And that's that parallel universe. As the Course says, beyond this world, there is a world I want. Now, what Jesus says in the Course in Miracles, he says, if you're lost in the world, if you feel stuck in the world that is filled with fear and filled with anxiety and filled with depression, take my hand. Take my hand as would a small child take the hand of an elder brother, and I will walk you across the rocks. I will take you beyond that. And then he says, one of my favorite book lines in the Course, I assure you, this is no idle fantasy. Now, at this point, Amy, we are at a place as a species where it's not even a survivable option to refuse to evolve. When we were kids, we were taught about evolution. And if a species gets to the point where its major behavioral patterns collectively are not well adapted for human survival, for species survival, one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to evolve or it's going to go extinct. And that's where we are. We're beyond dysfunctional. We are malfunctional. The way we're treating the earth is malfunctional. A war everywhere all the time and so much money invested in it is malfunctional. So what's the mutation? The great religious and spiritual teachings. Because the mutation is a member of the species that demonstrates a better way. In the Course in Miracles, it says salvation begins when you consider the possibility there might be a better way. And even salvation, the Course in Miracles is filled with this, where you have these traditional Christian terms, but used in decidedly non-traditional psychotherapeutic ways. That's why students of the Course, myself included, aren't even Christian. There are some people who are, some people aren't. The Course in Miracles says these teachings are for those who, all religions and no religion. Because you get, what is there to be safe? Pardon?
Was it a channeled text?
Yeah,
I've heard that it was a channeled text.
So he says, the idea of being saved, the only thing to be saved from is our own fear-based thinking. The only thing to be saved from is our lack of awareness. What you do to others is coming back at you.
So theoretically, then how do you bring that into practical reality? Like simply for people, so that it isn't these abstract concepts, but that it's things they can apply to their everyday life.
And I, enlightenment begins as an abstract concept, takes that journey without distance from the head to the heart. Now, some people are listening, like I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. If I do those workbook exercises every morning, I have a different day. Doesn't mean I'll be a enlightened master the rest of the day, but the probability is greatly increased that I'll stay centered. I'll stay basically on the spiritual wagon, reminded in every situation, show up in love, try to show up in your best, think of other people, try to be a space that everybody can grow. And that doesn't mean I won't fall off, doesn't mean I won't be tempted, but it not only decreases the probability that I'll fall off the spiritual wagon, it also increases the probability that even if I do, I'll catch myself quickly, be able to atone, make amends, and go forward. Okay. So there are so many paths. There's mindfulness practices, there's TM, there's Course in Miracles, there's every great religion. Now, this is what's happening. There are 3 categories of people listening right now. First category is, yes, she's right, I do it and it makes all the difference. Second category, yes, she's right, I ought to do it more often. Third category, well, I'm open, I just don't know what would be the teacher or the teaching or the book for me. Now, to that person, I say, just be willing, say a little prayer, and within days, if not maybe weeks, but probably days, something's going to fall at your feet. It's going to be a book. It's going to be a friend who says, do you want to go to this meditation class with me? It's as soon as you say, I want to find my reconnection with my true self with a capital S.
Right. And then people would call that manifestation, right? And the sort of new agey term. But it's the openness towards being willing to allow what needs to show up to show up.
That's right. That's right.
So I have like so many questions. I think we've gotten to 2. Okay. What does, let me see where I want to go here. Humanity being overwhelmed by karmic debt.
We are experiencing on the planet right now many results of our own misuse of the mind, misuse of nature, misuse of our resources. The Course in Miracles said that God has created cause and effect. And God, once he creates a law, nothing's going to alter that. We can miscreate with our minds, i.e. use them non-lovingly. But what we can't do is diminish their power. Fossil fuel extraction, carbon emissions, higher temperatures. The hurricanes are here. Fires are here. It's all happening just as was predicted. All of the incredible money that the nations of the world have invested in weapons of mass destruction and underinvested in peace building.
When I think about the amount of money that was spent in this election,
that's right,
and what could have been done with that money, it is sickening to me.
It is a multi-billion-dollar political, media, donor, industrial complex. And I know that very, very well. So once again, even that, we have not been reverent. We have not been wise. We have not been responsible. We have put profits over people. And now it's all coming home to roost. And people are feeling cynical and desperate and like there's no hope. But there's always hope. The Course in Miracles says that God has an answer to every problem the moment the problem occurs. And also, just as Americans, if you look at American history, we had slavery, but then the abolitionists did take care of that. We had the institutional suppression of women. The women's suffrage movement did take care of that. We had the Gilded Age, then the early labor organizers took care of that. We had segregation, then the civil rights movement took care of that. It's simply our turn. But we have to look at the characterological facets of personality that existed within those who rose to the challenge of their own time. We're not going to rise to the challenges if we're complacent, if we're ditzy, if women are thinking and acting like girls, if men are thinking and acting like boys, if we're only thinking about ourselves, if we're only thinking about our group and our silo, if we're not willing to listen to one another. So it has to begin with tremendous transformation of our own personalities and our own thought system, because some of the biggest blocks to that are as present on the left as on the right. Mm-hmm. This smug, self-righteous, I'm right, you're wrong. Not only that, if you're wrong, in my mind, you should shut up. Hello? Mm-hmm. As opposed to, excuse me, nobody has a monopoly on the truth. Everybody gets to own this country. And people have the right to disagree with you.
Do you think we're at a place where we can begin to do that? Like I mean, everything that you would say in your presidential run made a whole lot of sense to me. But it seemed that people aren't ready for that. They weren't ready for it. I don't know that they're no longer not ready for it, but it speaks to a truth, like a human truth.
So this is the deal. It's not that people weren't ready for what I had to say. It's that too many people weren't ready to question the codependent acquiescence by which they surrendered their own critical thought processes to the DNC, who said, no, it's got to be Joe. Like a wizard behind a curtain. Mm-hmm. That's what people weren't ready for. The fact I got almost 500,000 votes actually means, given how suppressed my candidacy was, it means actually that most people who heard me actually voted for me. What I was saying is much more in keeping with the views of the American people as demonstrated in poll after poll. So what people weren't ready for is to see through this canard by which the Democratic Party said, no, there's not going to be a primary. Now, or she's a spoiler, which, excuse me, if you're in the 7th grade, you can't be a spoiler in a primary. Or we don't primary a sitting president, which somebody as old as I am, like I remember when Eugene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy Sr. Primaried Lyndon Johnson. That's what people weren't ready for. Mm-hmm. So I think, Amy, from what I can see, since Election Day, a lot of people have woken up. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have grown up. So when you say people weren't ready, I think there was a direct assent made, oh my God, what did we do? And, anybody who says, oh, I didn't know, well, you should have known. Mm-hmm. You might have thought this through a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of people do know that. And all kinds of things are possible now. But we have to hurry. Mm-hmm. There's no playing small now. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No, I used to always say, it's the 11th hour, but it's not midnight yet.
It's midnight.
Well, it's pretty much 8:58, 11:58 right now.
Right. Mm-hmm. I know. And this is, I hear it too. I led a women's retreat last weekend, and so many people are like, first of all, it was a perfect weekend for it. And people were coming in fearful of what was going to be brought up, and are we going to talk about it, and how do we move forward from it? And so much fear. The fear just was so overwhelming, and we were able to put it to rest pretty quickly in terms of just talking about like the importance of listening to yourself, listening to others, being open, and coming, frankly, from this place of love for the other as a way of seeing their perspective.
In the Course in Miracles, he says, the presence of fear is a sure sign you're trusting in your own strength. He says, do not be concerned about your own readiness, just be consistently aware of mine. This is where something like the mystic Jesus comes in. And I also want to point out that in the history of social justice movements in the United States, many have arisen from religious and spiritual circles. Among white abolitionists, the movement arose from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. Many of the women who were leaders in the women's suffrage movement were religious Quakers. Dr. King, obviously, was a Baptist preacher. So those of us who have faith in that which is as yet unseen, the fear is there if you're own, love in the Course, he says, if you're only trusting in your own strength, you have every reason to be fearful and anxious. But if you realize there is a force in the universe, it's what Martin Luther King called cosmic companionship. And on the other side of this chapter, we're going to have a better chapter than ever. But remember, like you were just saying, Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. The majority of Americans are not on the extreme of either side. The majority of Americans exist within the purview of high-minded conservative and high-minded liberal principles. And we have to listen to one another. We have to come out of our silos right now. And if you don't come out of your silo, you are disconnected from your fellow Americans. And yes, you will be afraid. And if you do, Martin Luther King said, you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. So if you really want this country to get better, no matter what side of your politics you're on, get off your high horse. None of us know everything. None of us have a monopoly on truth. Listen to others. And when you do, Amy, the fear isn't there. Fear doesn't, there are some bad actors. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that this isn't a critical moment. Listen, I'm the one who's been screaming about it for the last year and a half. We got it. So I'm the last person you could call naive to the dangers. But we just have to mount a loyal opposition to what we disagree with. Give credit, we have elections. The people have elected Donald Trump. We have to respect the process, agree where we agree, and passionately disagree if we need to passionately disagree. And you stand in that space of love for your country, that you're not going to let certain things go by if you think that they are wrong. You almost can't be afraid, because where there's love, there can't be fear.
When you say death in your book, death is the reward for a life well lived. One of the things I love talking about in this show is death. How do you see it that way?
The Course in Miracles, as I mentioned before, says the end of our physical life is not an end, but a continuation. The Course describes the human body like a set of clothes, priceless set of clothes. You take your clothes off, in the evening. That doesn't mean you think you're gone. It's just you don't have your clothes on anymore. And so when you relate to the life of the spirit, rather than the life of the body as your essential self, then death takes on an entirely different thing. I know for myself, and I know a lot of people feel this way, I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid of the process. I'm afraid of certain ways I'm a human being. But the concept, I don't have a sense that I'll be gone when I'm gone. And of course, with the work you do, you would certainly know that.
Right.
The Course in Miracles says we will evolve to a place. We've all heard of people who have had good deaths. Like I remember the actress Ruth Gordon died many years ago. She sat down for tea. She was having tea with someone. She put her head down. She was gone.
My great grandma, she told my grandma and my mom, can you go get me some ice cream? And they came back and she was gone.
Blessed. So I think that's where, and the Course in Miracles does say, death is not the punishment, death is the reward. And it's a reward for a life well lived. When I was younger, I remember reading a Buddhist book, and it was talking about how important it is to die happy.
Like a kid younger or not a kid younger? I'm imagining a little Marianne Williamson.
No, more like when I was a young woman.
Okay.
And I read a Buddhist book, and in this Buddhist book, there was all this stuff about dying happy. And I kind of couldn't put it together. Why all this emphasis on dying happy? And now I think I understand. You want to feel on the last day of your life, I kicked ass to the best of my ability. Yes, I think that ultimate Talmudic saying, you are not expected to complete the task, but neither are you permitted to abandon it. I think about Susan B. Anthony, who gave her entire life to women's suffrage and the idea that women should be able to vote. Well, she didn't live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment. But I always feel like every time a woman votes in this country, her soul must tingle. So I think you want to think about, not just will I be able to get that car, but after I die, will my soul tingle?
I love that. I love that thinking. Like, will I, like, sort of now when they say that, when you get the chills, it's because you had the experience of another soul, that the soul might do that on the other side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The idea that, the greatest accomplishments in life have been created by people who were living for the ages. I remember reading a book once about the great cathedrals of Europe. And
you have a lot in your mind. Oh my God. How do you
I've lived a long time. I always say to people, every day, you've done this, you've done that. I've lived longer. But this business about the cathedrals. On one hand, the great cathedrals of Europe are among the great wonders of the world. But these were not built with machines. Mm-hmm. They took generations to build. So you look at these incredible artistic creations, architecturally, artistically, and so forth. Think how many thousands of people did that work knowing they would never live to see the completion of that cathedral. Mm-hmm. What this book was about? Was about Mary. It was about because it was about the idea of that the greatest creativity in the world has been what men were doing for the Virgin Mary. That's what those cathedrals were. Think of the religiosity. Mm-hmm. I'm going to spend my life on this, making it the most beautiful thing in the world that I will never see to please her. Mm. That's living your life at a pretty high level, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right, because you're in service to others.
And you're in service to something so much bigger than anything this lifetime could ever show you.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things you talk about. You talk about faith in the book, faith, love, and service, that those three things are really a life well lived.
Sometimes people say to me, well, Marianne, could you give me 3 easy steps? And the answer is no. Spiritual transformation is not a to-do list. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's certain things like eat better food, exercise, put down your tablet, and make sure that your morning is spent with at least 5 minutes of realigning your nervous system to a practice. But at the deepest level, no, this isn't about easy steps. It's about transforming your life. It's about every single aspect of your personality. Could you be better? Mm-hmm. It's about atoning for every mistake. It's about forgiving people for theirs. It's about refusing to give up your critical thinking. It's about refusing to play small. It's about refusing to go ditzy. It's about refusing to coddle your wound. It's about refusing to only focus on your trauma when other people have a lot of them too. Mm-hmm. It's like it takes work to become the people that we need to be. But I think there is a yearning for that now. I don't think, and I would assume you agree with me, there are enough of us yearning for something more beautiful and more true and more holy. And I think at this point, it's about supporting each other. Mm-hmm.
I think so. I just hope those aren't the only people, that the people I surround myself with aren't the only people that want that.
You know what, Amy? We need a critical mass. We don't need a majority. Mm-hmm. And I also think it's really important right now for everybody to realize some of the people who are just as dedicated as you are to all the things we've talked about voted differently than you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Where do you see psychology and psychotherapy fitting into this paradigm? Because you talked about, one of the things I say, people show up in my office and they're like, how long is this going to take? And I'm like, no one ever likes my answer to that question.
What is your answer?
My answer is it's going to take as long as it's going to take, and it could be the rest of your life. And maybe, and I see people very, very long term. So many of my patients I've seen no one I've seen less than 5 years at this point.
When I said before that we're living in a period of a great rethink, we're rethinking business, we're rethinking economics, we're rethinking healing, we're rethinking politics, we're rethinking spirituality. We are also rethinking therapy. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of modern psychotherapy has done more to exacerbate the problem than to provide a solution. A lot of modern psychotherapy has been based on analyzing the darkness as though that'll get you to the light. Ultimately, where you got your issues is not as important as the fact that they're yours now. I've lived enough of my life understanding why I was the way I was. No, what really mattered was that I began to take responsibility for the fact that it's up to you to change it and you are accountable.
Right. What happened to you explains.
And a lot of things that are
behavior, doesn't
psychotherapy,
excuse
I
it.
don't know, maybe eat less sugar, maybe get some exercise. You know, there are a lot of things, and that is not in any way minimizing our deeper problems. A lot of also one of the ways that modern psychotherapy has contributed to the problem is making people think it's only about me when the same issue you're having, everybody else is having too. So like maybe there's a collective issue here. Women who are so depressed that they have to go back to work. Well, there are, after the birth of a child, there are millions and millions and millions of years of evolution that have gone into a woman's hormonal knowing it's too soon. So the problem isn't that you're depressed. The problem is that, no, I'm sorry?
Go ahead, and then I'll.
So in a case like that, the problem is not just that you're depressed. The problem is that we don't have paid family leave. The problem is that in some other societies, they recognize how important it is for mothers and fathers to be able to stay home with their child. So I think, and I assume you're an example of a shift. Obviously you would be. There are people who are psychotherapists now completely revolutionizing that field. So when you ask me, where do I see it like everything else. It can be used for harm. It can be used for good.
Well, and to your point about loneliness that you talked about earlier and the stoop sitting, you know, we are in a crisis of loneliness because we don't have those communities of just hanging out. Everything is, as a parent, what I see is everything is scheduled. Everything is, you know, it's all about competition. There's no collaboration. It's not about, I mean, this seems so simplistic, but like how many people don't even carpool with other people anymore?
That's exactly right.
And it's like,
and it's not simplistic. You're absolutely right. It's like I was talking earlier about people used to sit on their front porch and talk to their neighbors.
Yeah. And they're not even, and then maybe they gather in the park after school and their kids would play on the playground, but they're not doing that. They're driving their kids to a million activities. And then they're wondering why 6-year-olds are depressed, and people are saying, well, it's because of social media, but 6-year-olds aren't on social media. I go hot-headed on this.
All of it, including some of the sugar those kids are eating. I mean, I have nieces who taught the 3rd grade. My sister had also, and I remember them saying that even in affluent neighborhoods, the food that kids would come with from home that they just couldn't even believe. There's so much now that we do know. We need to stop pretending we don't know. But the era of data collection is over.
Yeah, I don't think we need more of that.
No, we need to apply it now. You know what to do. In everything that you and I have talked about, I doubt that anything you and I talked about today has been news. You know, it's like when my career began and I would talk about certain spiritual principles. People might say to someone next to them, this is so amazing. I never even thought about that. Those days are over. It's much more likely that somebody says, that's exactly what we were talking about last night. Somebody doesn't listen to a podcast about this now so much to hear something new as to access more deeply the things that we're already thinking about. It's time to just do it now. Rehearsal's over.
And to feel like there's other people out there that are also thinking this.
Well, I think that's a large part of the loneliness thing too. It's like we're so lonely, but maybe we need to reach out. Why isn't anybody calling? Well, why aren't you calling them?
Right. And be real, like be authentic and vulnerable and honest about what you're going through, because this is what I said last week at the retreat. When you show up authentically, love can't help but develop. It just is like this beauty. And we witnessed it. 10 women who didn't know each other sharing vulnerable parts of themselves. And they were, by the end, it was like 3 days. and they felt closer than they did to their friends as a result of this.
When you share a spiritual space with someone, it's a level of intimacy. I think also, though, it's true, a lot of people would hear what you just said about showing up authentically, and it's almost like we don't know how.
Right, absolutely.
But there is a how-to to that. Before you walk into the room, before you go into the meeting, before you go into the dinner party, before you go on the date, before you go anywhere, blast the room with love before you go. And if Jesus is part of your problem-solving modality, see with your inner mind, see Jesus with his arms around everybody at the table before you even walk in.
But what if Jesus isn't? Then
Pardon?
What if Jesus isn't part of your...
Well, if it's not, just blast it with love. Blast it with an angel. Pray for everybody. It doesn't matter. Jesus is one portal, and because we're talking also about a particular book, he's certainly a portal. And all of this has to do with directing the subconscious mind. And because all minds are joined, when you have love in your heart for someone, they can feel it. So if I'm not walking in proactively with the intention to be a loving presence in that room, then the mental energy that could be used to extend love is being used to project fear. They won't like me. I don't know any of these people. I don't like those people. I hear that they're blah, blah, blah. And then everybody's like this. Proactively walk into the room, blast it with love before you go. Stop, blast it with room. And I talk in the book I talk quite a bit about that, particularly places where I got it wrong and forgot to do that. Oops. And the kind of results that came about because of it.
Well, Marianne, I mean, I could keep you on for like 4 hours, but if people do want to hear you for an extended period of time, I'm so excited because you're going to be in Chicago in a couple weeks on December 7th, I believe. That's the Saturday, right?
Yeah.
At my friend Kathy Bressler's altar. It's an amazing space. So if you live in Chicago, this is your chance to see live. And I believe it's a workshop that you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's 2 to 5 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
You know, during my presidential campaign, I visited Chicago 2 or 3 times. What a cool thing you've got going there, particularly some amazing women in Chicago. So
we're sort of this like, you know, it always seems everybody that I talk to for my podcast are on the coasts, but there's a lot of people here that are doing some really, really meaningful work in a very grounded Midwestern way that we do, that it feels, I think, tangible for people.
I raised my daughter in Michigan. I lived there for 8 years. And also I grew up in Texas, born and raised in Houston. So I don't have any of this, it's only happening on the coast stuff. There's amazing stuff happening everywhere. And not only that, all over this world. So let's remember that. None of us, I think sometimes you were talking about loneliness. I think even in terms of the stuff that everybody's going through about the election and everything, you're not alone. Millions of people feel the way you do. So
I know. And your book, The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love, is out now. If you've not read Return to Love, that is a must read. And
this is like a sequel, isn't it?
Yes. And I read that so long ago. So I was like trying to recall all the details of that, but I remember reading it. I mean, 20 years ago?
Yeah. That book came out in 1992.
Yeah. So more than
32 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. So I probably read it like around college.
It was written at a time when in my chapter about forgiveness, talk about, I don't know if you remember this, I talk about how I really understand how hard it can be to forgive because I had this date with this guy for the Olympics and he stood me up.
Yes, you talked about
That's
that in
how
this book
long
too.
ago it was. Right. And that's the most extreme example I could come up with. What an innocent time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Marianne, if people are interested, I don't know, I mean, I can't even believe I have to tell people where they need to go find you, but where can they find you?
Marianne.com. Marianne. And of course, I'm on social media. I'm on Substack also, which is where I'm writing articles. So it would be an honor if you visited any of those places, put your name on my mailing list and so forth.
And I've seen you on lots of different news shows recently post this election. So
The country's having a conversation with itself.
Well, and
Good.
I think nobody better to facilitate that conversation than you. So
Thank you.
Thank you for the honor of being here today, and for your time and your wisdom over all of these years. And I only hope I can carry some sort of little spark of your torch, because you have certainly inspired me.
Number one, you already are. Thank you for saying it, but you already are. And not only you, I'm seeing something in really because of these experiences with all these podcasts. I'm so impressed, not just by you, but by others as well. There is, we really allowed ourselves in this society to be infantilized, but there's something going on now. And so as long as women like yourself, and men also, but I'm really seeing what the women are out there talking as you do, knowing what you know, sharing what you know, teaching what you need to teach, we're going to be okay. We just have to not tarry.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. God bless you, honey.
You too. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.